Let's two after. I guess we can go ahead and get started, Peter.
Okay, let me just get my thing here. Good morning, everybody. This is Peter Cressy from FCA. I'm the VP of Programs FCA. I'm joined by Paul Wirtz, who's the president of FCA Atlanta chapter. Today, we're presenting the first installment of the Cyber Series, Top Cybersecurity Trends for Industry and Government, What You Must Know. Paul will tell a little bit about FCA Atlanta, and then we'll move into the program. Paul?
Oh, good morning. Thank you, Peter. So our mission in Atlanta is, as a nonprofit, we support STEM, science, technology, education, and math. And we do that in a variety of ways, primarily through our monthly meetings where we share topics of interest to our members. We also work with various organizations around the state of Georgia, University of North Georgia, Georgia Tech, and USO, as we do some volunteer for them over the holiday season coming up, and try to share our the base of knowledge that we've got. We have about 300 members. 25% of them are our life members, and a lot of them are retired military or industry that support the federal government. So we have a great wealth of knowledge in our organization. Our parent organization is FCA International, and there's about 31,000 members around the world, and about 150 chapters. And so we're continuing our focus to serve the community. This year's been a little bit different, but we're doing Zoom now, and welcome to the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm enjoying FCA. I was an original member back in the 80s when I was in the Air Force, and now I've rejoined, and it's a very vibrant organization with all these members, a lot going on. Today's session is sponsored by RedChip. RedChip's an Atlanta company that takes ideas to market. And as we move the ideas to market, we help companies go to the next level. So if you're interested in RedChip, the URL is shown before at redchipventures.com. But the meat of the program is I'm joined by two industry expert speakers. Chuck Green is the president and CEO of Assured Information Security, and he will speak and give a little bit more introduction to him, but I think he's made a commitment for over 20 years to the cyber industry, working together with DoD and also in deep research. Steve King is the Director of Cybersecurity Advisory Services for Cyber Theory and also a CISO for the parent company. And I'll let him give a little bit more introduction there, but really delighted to have you guys both join. And so what we'd like to do today is to kick it off to Steve King for an introduction. Chuck will give his overview of the top trends, and then we'll have dialogue from there. If you have questions, please chat back to Paul or me. We'll get those, but and then we can aggregate those and have a little bit interaction. Okay, let me kick it off to Steve. Steve, welcome, and I'll send it over to you here now.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate you having me on the show. I guess I'm going to try to give you some background on kind of what's going on in the private sector, I guess. From our view, and Information Security Media Group is sort of like the cable news network or ESPN of cyber. We have 990,000 paid members around the globe, have offices in about 30 different locations. We have 33 separate news desks, all covering various topics from breach to risk to government to finance and healthcare and so forth, and 22 editors who manage all of that and produce content all day long. So I am the resident CISO at ISMG. I also run the Cyber Theory marketing advisory group, that's focused entirely on cybersecurity. So that's kind of the background. In my former life, I did 3 startups in the cybersecurity space in the last 20 years, exited all 3 successfully. One was an MSSP, one was an MDR, one was in the information integrated risk management space, excuse me. And so, yeah, and then I worked as a CISO for Wells Fargo Technology Division for 6 years. So I've had a broad exposure to the world of cybersecurity in the last 20 years. What we see now is a rush toward digitization that is causing a dramatic expansion of the threat landscape, unprecedented in scope. in that in our prior to COVID-19, there were people working from home, but the corporate network was essentially defined the perimeter of the control space, if you will. Now that network no longer exists, the individual points of presence that we all represent, and the internet is the new boundaryless network. And so it's virtually impossible to defend with the conventional controls of February prior to COVID-19. And what it gives rise to is a lots and lots of people working from home with corporate laptops connected to the corporate network, and alongside that, running through exactly the same router in 95% of the cases, are all of the other things that go on in the home today. And so with spouses having their own jobs or recreational activities or what have you, with children in online learning environments, we have lots and lots of devices connecting through that router that's also serving the corporate network through which these remote workers are having access to their daily workload. And what happens then is that you have a 6, 7, 8x risk exposure now that everybody, all of those devices may or may not be vulnerable. The likelihood is that they're severely vulnerable. And so it creates an insanely target-rich environment for our adversaries, be they state-sponsored or non-state-sponsored. So that's a significant problem. And while there are lots and lots of workarounds that, you know, if we think about, it's only been, what, 6 or 7 months since we've been in this condition, 7 months, I guess. And, you know, corporate IT departments and corporate security departments have rushed to, you know, throw in what they hope for temporary solutions involving virtual private networks, et cetera. Do not account for a worker unplugging his laptop, running down to Starbucks, grabbing a cup of coffee, doing his work through the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and then bringing that same system back and reconnecting it to the network. And the incidence of island hopping have just skyrocketed, whether it be that worker who was attacked while they were at Starbucks and the malware resides on that laptop and then is returned to the corporate network through that connection after they return from the Starbucks, or whether it's voting stations at the municipal, local, state government level that are susceptible to exactly that same threat. And now all of a sudden you have the potential for a malware attack to hold hostage all of those votes in all of those voting areas. So we have both a expanded traditional enterprise threat as that landscape has exploded, and we also now have an expanded critical infrastructure and what I consider to be an existential threat for our national security as well. That extends now, of course, to beyond, beyond voting stations to critical infrastructure and so forth. And I'm sure that Chuck will provide some deeper insights into what the federal government world looks like in the way of cybersecurity. But from a private side look, we're facing the same four challenges that we've faced for the last 15 years in the space. And there are relationship dynamics across information, education, economics, and technology that we find ourselves looking at our adversaries in an extraordinarily superior position on the information side.
Yeah, this Peter, and I'll turn it over here. But when we think about an adversary, if we break it down into state actors, China, North Korea, Iran, versus criminal actors, which could be anybody coming out of certain countries like Russia and Bulgaria, as an example. What's the mix between the adversary? How do you characterize an adversary? I've always thought it was all state actors, but a lot of it's really just criminally driven. Is that right? Or what's the mix between?
A lot of it is criminally driven, but a lot of it is also driven by influence cyber ops. And that influence cyber has been going on for a long time prior to the internet, and it had taken a different form of misinformation. But with the internet, I think it was Archimedes who said, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I can move the world. And that's what we have today. That's the internet. So you have this amazing leverage, which plays into the four pillars that I just described, where on like the economic side, you could have somebody with a $25 malware kit in their parents' bedroom, putting together an attack on a major bank in the States. And so that compares with somebody like Chase, who spends close to $1 billion a year on cybersecurity defense. So there's an amazing imbalance in terms of the economics of our adversaries and what we have to do to defend against it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I know that I'll turn it over, but I know the city of Atlanta, their ransom was about $50,000, and they ended up spending about 15 million.
I think it was 17 million. Yeah, actually,
they didn't give in to the ransom. So for a $50,000 ransom, they from the two Iranian guys, they ended up remediating and spending $17 million. So it's severe. Okay. Well, good fun. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, good foundation. You kind of really laid it out from an existential threat that we face today, and then it gets real personal real quick. So, okay. Well, that gives you kind of we're going to get deeper in, but that gives a foundation. Representing sort of the government, but industry side is Chuck Green. Chuck, from your point of view, we talked about the threat, but I'm wondering how you would lay it out of what people would need to know from what the government's thinking as you deal with the government, if you give a little perspective of how you work together with the U.S. government.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. So AIS has been around for about 20 years. We've been doing working within the research and development domain with the DoD and intelligence community long before we were using the term cyber. So we were working information operations and network warfare and fancy military terms they used back then. From our perspective, working with the DoD and not working in the commercial market, we have a little bit of a different point of view on all of this. So really, the DoD tackles the cybersecurity technology in two different manners. So the first manner is technology superiority. So these are driven by the research organizations within the DoD, for example, the Air Force Research Lab or DARPA or IARPA or the like. And the other is driven by Congress and by the White House. And then the second portion is addressing the warfighter needs and the unique needs that the military has to do their job. And so the two drivers are sometimes at odds with each other. So the warfighter has their needs and the needs that they need right now. And sometimes it's not yet known when we're doing the research how it will be applied to the warfighter. So there's always this push and pull back and forth. So a case in point is, when I was asked for this, prepare for this event, what areas are you seeing the activity? My answer was kind of pretty simple. And they fall into both of those buckets. The first one is artificial intelligence, machine learning. The second one is quantum. And the third is COVID response. And the reason why I mentioned COVID response in relation to cybersecurity is because the DoD has got a huge push to move everybody to work from home. But yet there's still a mission to execute and they still need access to classified data. So where we've been working in this is to help bring classified data to the home. So it's taking this idea of VPNing and the expansion that Steve talked about, to everybody work from home, and then adding a whole new level of complexity on top of it, saying, yes, and we're also going to provide you access to classified networks and classified data. We need to be able to protect at that level. And that has resulted in the delivery of capabilities that must meet NSA certifications, which that in itself is a slow process, and then a massive build out of infrastructure to support the VPNs, VDI storage, and server demands. In the case of artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI and quantum, AI is an easier sell. So we can show distinct linkages to the needs of the warfighter today. So areas that we're seeing work going on and applying AI to the cyber defense and the military mission, big data, big networks. I mean, think of the DoD networks as, take any enterprise network you think of and then expand it 10 or 100 fold. And that's what the level that the government is working with. And it's beyond what we would think in a traditional manner. Yeah, there's computers and there's servers, but and IoT devices, but there's also weapon systems and aircraft and satellite systems, and it just blows it out in an unbelievably complex manner. And so working within all that domain and all that data, that's a lot of data sensing going on. And it even to take it even another level beyond that, it's spreading that across different classification levels and all the complexities of all of that. So now you're stuck in situations where you need to be able to do rapid decision making, what data to share, what data to ignore, what are the options. And so now it becomes a problem of speed to decision, because in military terms, not being able to react quickly could mean people die. And so there's a big investment in the development and maturation of new and existing models with an effort to maintain technical superiority, being able to measure the trust of the AI models, and then even researching the weakness of those AI models, because those are what our adversary might use against us. And it's hitting all sorts of areas, whether it's automated defense, automated offense, automated code generation, to highly tuned specific tasks within the military, very large area. And to continue to push on that, actually what's coincidental about this conversation is yesterday, Defense Department's Joint Artificial Intelligence Center announced plans to expedite funding to adopt commercially available AI technologies in the government use. And they announced the commercial solutions opening seeking information for commercial AI prototypes in a dozen different key areas. And for those that are familiar with military and DoD contracting, commercial solutions opening is equivalent to an RFI. And we're seeing huge investments in AI from NSF, DARPA, AFRL, pushing the technology. On the quantum side, though, and I bring this up because it's less clear here, is there's a lot of focus on networking, quantum networking, and quantum encryption, but then trying to wrap our heads around how quantum works, because it's fundamentally different than anything that we're used to that we've been doing for the last 20 years. And then applying that to the existing areas, and how can we apply that to the warfighter and their needs today? And that's a very fuzzy area. And just to give you a sense of how much is being invested in the DoD side, the 2021 proposed budget has a 30% increase in AI ML funding for a total of $2.2 billion. We're seeing an increase from 1.2 billion to 1.5 billion for artificial intelligence, and an increase from 579 million to 700 million for quantum. But that's not all that's going on. I mean, if you think of the DoD, it's massive. Its networks are massive. The problems they're trying to solve are many of the same as the commercial side, but at an incredibly larger numbers. So, there's a lot of work going on combating disinformation. Steve mentioned PSYOPs, psychological operations earlier, fighting deep fake spoofing, and a lot of work on cyber attribution, because we want to know who the bad actors are that are doing these things, and we want to know them as quickly as possible. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the DoD networks are expanded beyond what you would traditionally think, So there's a lot of work in the convergence of, the traditional EW, the electronic warfare, because a lot of our cyber networks ride over this infrastructure. So the convergence of, EM and cyber. So looking at, the technologies that the government's using, such as software-defined spectrum and dynamic spectrum, and looking at vulnerability analysis within those areas. And the big part of what the government wants to be able to do is, even in a contested environment, they want to be able to fight through. So resiliency is a big component of this. Survivability, how do we stay operating even when 90% of what we're trying to do is going down? And of course, there's a big push in the US government too for UAS and counter UAS. So very concerned about your vehicle communications, your command and controls, and EW attacks on those. And then I mentioned earlier, multi-level security is a big area because they have these different networks. They need to be able to move data between these networks but still be able to have access, again, back to the speed to decision. And then being able to mathematically prove that the classified data is not being compromised, because if that happens, again, we're back to a situation where it costs lives. And then all the cybersecurity, that Steve mentioned, but all with a military twist, right? Botnets, ransomware, IoT, malware detection, fingerprinting, vulnerability assessment, all applies, but at a scale of 100 times bigger. We have a capability that we use to support the Air Force 55th Wing. And that capability was built with the idea that we were going to support 1,000 nodes. And the next thing we know, it's being applied to 200,000 nodes. And we're hoping and praying that it works. It doesn't fall down, because, as a contractor, we weren't able to simulate that kind of exercise. So I guess to kind of get down to the point, the DoD is also very concerned about supply chain readiness, and their concerns about vulnerability and preparedness. And so, I don't know if this is the right form or not, but CMMC and NIST SP 800-171 is a big component of working with the military. And I'm going to pull a little quote here from Kathleen Arrington, the CISO for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. This was just a few days ago. She said, quote, "Security is the foundation of all government contracting." So there's a big push to make sure that everybody who's doing business with the government is meeting a minimum security requirements.
Yeah, I think we're going to break off in the discussion on a little bit about how you meet the needs. And I just see that Roy Hadley jumped in, who's the expert in Atlanta on CMMC and really growing. But what I simply heard is that it's you get right down to the warfighter and what his needs are, but you have to look at the context of big. And it looks like it's really just managing huge and massive big data sets. And it's almost a processing power and management, a big data management area. So when we look at the bridge between the assets that the government uses and what industry uses, I think I wanted to ask Steve, when you listen to those trends that are coming from the government of this massive multi-billion-dollar investment, which areas do you think that industry is working on as well today? In other words, what are the connections there that you see?
Well, the primary connection.
Everything, I know.
Yeah. I was going to say that from our point of view, is education. We have 350,000 some odd unfilled cybersecurity jobs in this country, 3.5 million globally. Excuse me. And there is no holistic, centralized source for a full curriculum of cybersecurity training. If all of our participating members in ISMG Cyber board, there's 160 CISOs on that board, all tell us the same thing, and that is that they have a huge vacuum of cyber warrior class trained employees and frontline workers. So it's really like a forward operating base without an infantry division, right? So you've got a bunch of folks in the back with a lot of telemetry and a lot of technology and all of those terrific AI-enabled cyber defense systems, but there's nobody out front doing attack simulation, doing gaming, doing red team, purple team, pen testing, all of the kinds of things that need to happen to simulate the attacks that we're seeing today. And they're all advanced. They're all technically very, very complicated and super sophisticated. And we just don't have the troops to do anything about
Interesting.
it. So,
Yeah. I mean, I know when I was an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and I could get together with my colleagues on the base, and then we could talk about problems or issues that we want to do. But Chuck, you mentioned that the DoD people are working remotely. How do they come together? I was on a call with a bunch of guys 2 weeks ago for the training. There were 50 guys coming on Zoom, and I realized, my gosh, they're all at home. So how does the warfighter learn and grow, Chuck, from your point of view of what you're seeing? Is it possible, or maybe just different skill sets?
Well, I mean, there's two things that I would say about this. First, I would key off of what Steve said. It's not just war fighters, but it's the people developing the capabilities in the background we have a shortage of too. I mean, that 350,000 shortage includes both categories. And interestingly enough, getting people interested in this domain is proving harder and harder every day. But to build off of your question regarding doing this remotely, we're still seeing that play out. We are providing and we are working with the DoD to get the accesses to people remotely. The traditional models for, traditional ways of accessing, data and having video conferences still plays out the same, right? The DoD has a list of video conferencing software that they're allowed to use. And then that actually varies from group to group, right? Some groups allow ZoomGov, the government version of Zoom, and others don't because of the controversies that happened a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have infrastructure in place for doing video conferencing at the classified levels and extending that to the laptops. And to be candid with you, it's not awesome. To get the CSFC certification, that's the NSA certification for allowing remote access to classified information, requires a double VPN tunnel. So it's two VPNs, one wrapped inside the other, and they have to be separate vendors in order to create, a level of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Defense in depth. So the bandwidth is chewed up with a lot of encryption going on. And if you're home working and you don't have the greatest bandwidth in the world, which we've all seen somebody on a Zoom meeting here or there suffer from. And then on top of that, you got family in the household doing remote learning and somebody else working from home, you could start to run into issues there. And so in some cases, it's working really well and people are very efficient. And in other cases, it's not so much. And there's a lot of factors involved, as well as the individual who's working remotely. I think we've all seen it at this point that some people excel at working from home and other folks do not.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And then one of the other things, and again, that's part of the remote. And then technically, I know that AIS has made an investment to protect that and provide systems for that remote security. But Chuck, are there any other things that you mentioned all kinds of certifications, but I'm getting a feeling that there's an avalanche of certifications and standards and stuff that people and organizations have to keep up with. Can they keep up with all those certifications, or is that really stopping the growth of our security in a weird way? More certifications seem better, but you can't keep up, so you don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. So when the DFAR regulations came down, SB 800-171 was enforced on contractors. I'm just going to give a casual observation. It's not us particularly, but people that, in our domain space. I think people, because it was a self-certification process, I think there was companies, especially the smaller ones, who who didn't fit well in that one size fits all requirement of SB 800-171. They gave their best shot at it, but probably were not meeting the standards. And now that we have CMMC officially starting in early December, I think it's December 4th, we're going to see a number of small businesses drop off. That's why it's really important that the DoD is putting investments in DUI, in AFWorks, in DefenseWorks, the JIAC offering that I mentioned earlier, to draw people in, because I think there's going to be a cliff where a number of companies drop out of doing business with the government. And so we need to backfill those folks. And if we could backfill them in areas that we really need support, all the better. So I get it. I see why they want to do it. And honestly, it's beyond those certifications too. We're seeing big trends in the DoD to make sure that, it's open systems, because the government wants to end and reduce their reliance on vendor lock-in. That seems to be a little counter to trying to bring all these non-traditionals in, right? Because they have software that they want to sell, which ultimately locks you in.
Yeah.
It's a little bit counterintuitive there. We got the DoD cloud strategy that's playing out as we speak. We have, JEDI. We all heard about the Microsoft versus Amazon lawsuits going on. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar contract to bring cloud computing to the DoD and to do it with classified computing in the cloud, which that's a whole nother level of trying to execute the mission. And then the Air Force's Cloud One, and then a push toward what the DoD is calling DevSecOps. It's their own interpretation of the term, which includes processes and infrastructures riding over the top of these clouds. Big move to pushing agile and DevOps models, their version of it, but they want anybody who is required to follow those models, not the ones that the companies may have set up themselves. And again, it's to avoid vendor lock-in, cloud agnostic, with a big push on, a zero trust model, automating, pre-development compliance testing, leveraging microservices, rapid prototyping, and then there's some pluses in it too. Like if we got software we want to sit on a government network, we need an ATO, we need an authorization to operate.
Well, it sounds like you're trying to, you and other CEOs are managing a business, but then you have the needs of the government, and it's burdensome. And Steve, I just last question to you to feed off of what Chuck was saying is that from a CISO point of view, if he's reporting to the CEO, what is a CISO thinking about as he's trying to protect his enterprise? All these things, because he's got to manage a business and he's got to only has so much budget. Where are you seeing the CISOs today putting their money? Again, moving away from endpoint protection maybe and SIMs and things like that to other strategies to get the best bang for the buck. You're on mute, Steve. That's all right.
Sorry. This rush toward digitization that we can't resist. I mean, we're all living in a digital world now, and from a business point of view, that means that we're pushing. This stuff is bandwidth sensitive and pushing tons and tons of data now out, and so the technologies around SD-WAN and around SASE. Are where much of that money is being spent to kind of move to the edge and then provide a secured edge computing environment. Not easy to do. A lot of vendors rushing into that space. A lot of vendors are in that space. But that's where a lot of the concentration and
is that where you put your? I mean, you're a CISO for your company. Where do you think the best bang for the buck if you had to put money on something for a greater level of protection?
I worry less about the edge, just simply because we don't have that kind of data volume that another company might. We would, where I think you get the most bang for the buck these days is in deception technology and isolation technologies, where deception actually enables you to mount an active defense, and And instead of playing, whack-a-mole all day long, which is what most CISOs do all day long these days, you're able to actually go out and grab an incoming bad actor, and then send them on a lookalike path that isn't actually heading toward your assets, but a masquerading version of your assets.
Okay,
and then
interesting.
and you can isolate and trap them there. And then isolation technology is related to browser, so that you actually, many people feel like the browser is the edge of the network now. So if you can isolate the browser and trap and contain incoming through the browser, that's a great place to focus as well. So those are the two technologies that
wow, interesting. And I want to go with that grain a little bit, and then we're going to transition over to this bridge. But Chuck, AIS is a leader in the area of hunt and threat and other areas such as that. And within the confine of what you can say, deception, isolation, even offensive technologies, it looks like that will be something that industry will have to do. And seems very valuable strategy. Do you believe that's a valuable strategy in trying to protect everything? Maybe you need to go out.
I love that. Having been in this game for a very long time, actually, we on the DoD side, we and other companies like us have been building these capabilities for the DoD for close to 10 years. Heavy investments in both those areas have been made. In fact, I mentioned the classified work from home. It's all built on technology that does isolation. It's mathematically proven isolation, and we can isolate down to the individual cores on a CPU.
What is isolation? Can you help me and others understand a little bit more specifically?
So again, there's different types of isolation. So there's network isolation, and then there's process isolation. We're actually doing both. So we're segregating and separating, and we use some virtual technology in order to do that. So, and then we can mathematically prove by taking either this process or the entire operating system or a network, segregating it, using, a lot of times we use encryption technologies, and then verifying mathematically that you cannot cross the boundaries from one isolated container to the other. So we do that using some very special customized hypervisor technologies. We know some other companies that are doing very similar things. We actually work directly with Intel. We work directly with the Zen group for hypervisor work from Zen.
Yep.
And we also work with Cisco, Aruba, HP, Dell. We work with all these groups to help, to work with them in conjunction to make sure that we're able to do those things.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it was perfect. And I'll move on. But as part of the write-up, we'll have a little bit of write-up as a background here. But I'll put a link in on hypervisor technology, which gets you out of the conundrum of always messing with the operating system as a plane of attack. You can get away from that. So hypervisor isolation and that strategies around that are good strategies. And it's interesting, Steve, that's where you said you'd put your money. But go ahead, Chuck.
And Microsoft actually builds this into their enterprise level versions of Windows 10. They isolate the Active Directory authentication. You could turn that functionality on, and you could isolate the browser, and they do a few other isolation techniques. And they take advantage of their built-in Hyper-V hypervisor in order to support that.
Yeah.
We and others that are working in this area are just taking them to whole new levels beyond what they're doing, and working with them in order to achieve those goals.
Well, you're taking them against the old threat plane, and as long as you can move quickly. Well, I wanted to transition, and we're open for questions if people want to give questions in, but I wanted to get to a sense of what's the best bridge between government and industry. And starting with you, we just saw our bridge of isolation and deception and hunt and threat. That's a bridge. But what's the best way that if there's billions of dollars being spent in the government, that industry can participate? Start with you, Steve, and what do you look for of different bridges? Because that's what FC is trying to do. We're bridging between government and industry. What do you see as the best bridge between the commercial companies out there and the classic DoD cybersecurity classified?
Well, I would love to see the federal government move toward an air traffic control system that manages all of the instances of the internet that we use here. That's a lofty objective, but it's one that would eliminate a lot of redundant expense and trouble, if you will, on the commercial side, defending against these attacks, which are hourly, if not by the minute these days. So and then there's been several attempts over the years to move toward a better information sharing model between private and government, and that absolutely needs to happen. There has to be some motivation on the commercial side to do so, because we're all obviously paranoid by our DNA, and we're not sure that what we're going to give up is being matched by somebody else, or that how that information is going to end up. But we would love to understand better what the agencies are doing with cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think
we leverage for the commercial side.
Yeah, we're publishing. I know we publish threat libraries as an example, and there's a consortium that you can get threat libraries and everything else. But you bring up a valid point of speaking directly. A lot of the state actors against industry, which are China, Iran, Russia, also can be funders and part of industry. So it's kind of a balance. You have to be careful about what you're sharing, because you might be just sharing right back to the state actor that's is your adversary.
Well, the Chinese have, I don't think we need to worry too much about that. The Chinese have all of our IP well before it's even commercialized through the venture capital network that they have built over the last 5 and 6 years, and both in Menlo Park, California, and then in Beijing as well, sitting behind monster VC funds like Sequoia. For example, they co-invest in multiple Chinese deals. Exactly. And all of that, you don't do anything in China without the authority of the Minister of Defense. I spent 6 years in and out of China with our MSSP and MDR operation. We were forced to build a security operations center in Beijing and Shanghai, and we had to turn over all of our IP just to have an office there. So,
that's their backdoor. Yep, backdoor going through the investment in the LPs of the major VCs. And then, Chuck, from your point of view, you've got obviously AIS is a leader in cybersecurity for research and development. As you said, big R, little d, big D, little r. What's the best way? It must be frustrating. You've got this great technology you want to bring to industry. What's the best way to get to the commercial industry, in your opinion? What would you want to share if you were going to share something that could really help and grow commercial business?
Well, I kind of have a simple answer. If I knew that, I'd probably be a billionaire right now.
Okay,
I think it needs to turn into a two-way street. Commercial wants to have more access to what DoD is doing so that they can help them. But at the same time, those of us that are defense contractors are looking for ways to work with traditional commercial companies to bring our knowledge to the base, to their base. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's us having to decide that we want to work together. I will speak from experience. I have found it, as I've explored over the years, different opportunities to jump in the commercial space. I have some here and I have some there. And actually, most of those that do exist happen because a commercial organization or a large organization, or whether it be a car manufacturer or whoever, went to the government and said, hey, who should I work with? And somebody pointed them to us and we did the work. But those are kind of few and far between. At any given time, maybe we have 1 or 2 of those going on. So it's sort of, in my mind, it boils down to a decision that we want to work together, and we have to figure out how to speak to each other, because we speak in 2 different terms. We speak with military terms using 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms all day long, which I've tried to avoid in this conversation. And they, speak their speak. So we don't often, we end up talking past each other, and it's very difficult. And we're even more complicated too, right? Because we have, auditors that are in our books, DCAA, DCMA, and they don't like really too much seeing the mixture of government and non-government. And again, it depends on your model, but we do a lot of what's called CPFF work, cost plus fixed fee work.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that type of work, they just do not like seeing those costs in their mix. If you're doing, fixed fee or purchase orders or time and materials, it's not as big an issue. So it has to come down, in my opinion, to a decision that we want to work together, we want to share. And I kind of laugh a little bit because I'm starting to see shifts in the commercial arena to start to be concerned about the same things that we've been concerned in the military for 5 to 10 years. The conversation earlier about, working with deception and isolation. I mean, we've been doing that for a very long time. And we've made outreaches into the commercial domain with these technologies, and people just said, we don't really need it. And now all of a sudden we're starting to see it. Now, part of that is probably driven by, the fact that these nation state actors, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and if you watched the HBO documentary, The Perfect Weapon, that was released a week or so ago, which I recommend to everybody, you'll see how the nation state actions that used to be nation to nation, government to government, military to military, has now leaked down into the private sector. And that's starting to change the narrative quite a bit. Now, I do have one concern, is that we all just get used to it and it becomes part of our daily life and accept it and move on, and we don't do anything about it. So I'm a little concerned about that because, we're human beings and sometimes we just adjust. So,
well, and then if you had to choose one, if you could work together, and I hear there's different DNA between, because I've worked in both realms. Military it can be very exact at what they need, and they'll just make anything work, and it's good enough there. And then commercial folks will be good enough commercial, but as long as it's marketed and has a nice user interface that works for them. So there's different needs. But what would you share? We talked about deception and hunt and threaten technologies. Is there something you'd say, gosh, if I could take a technology that you got to have that you could have, is there something in your mind that you'd like to really work on with industry, or you think the government should really focus on one technical or software area?
I'm being exceedingly biased here.
Go ahead.
The isolation technologies that we are using, especially the technologies that allow access to people working classified from home, personally, I think the private industry would exceedingly benefit from it because it eliminates a lot of that threat space that Steve talked about by sending people home. The systems are isolated. We mathematically prove they're isolated. They've been proved by NSA. We can bring that technology to commercial bear. And you turn your laptop on, it can't go anywhere. It can't do anything until you follow the proper authentication process and a few other hoops that you got to jump through that all happen behind the scenes. You don't even see it as a user.
Yeah.
You're online and you're attached to the network, and you basically have a bubble around you that's keeping anybody. Let's say you are sitting in the Starbucks, you're blocked from all the kind of spoofing and BS that can happen in that kind of really contested environment, because that's what's designed to fight through.
Yeah.
If I were to bring something to market, that would be what I would pick. But I'll be candid, I've talked to quite a number of people and they're all like, yeah, VPNs are good enough.
But we have Steve King, that was his big thing, and we didn't even prompt him. So I said, what would you want? And he said, this is what he thinks CISOs would want and he would want. So maybe there's hope. Anyway, let's transition. We have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to give you a final response, Steve, there, and then finish up. I guess we've talked about a lot of things, but Steve, what's kind of your impression of this whole thing? Is what you have to know from government to industry? What's your takeaway from the conversation today of what people would have to know?
I just saw a question about education in K through 12, I think.
I like that. I saw that.
Or early cybersecurity training, right? And you're spot on. That our biggest problem has nothing to do with technology. Our biggest problem has to do with people. And there's two parts of that. One is the teachers in K through 12 have no ability to teach any curriculum at all because they have no grounding, they have no foundational skills around cybersecurity. So that's actually where we have to start, is getting the teachers educated. You know, but there's a second piece of this, which is that, to Chuck's point, we need to make a big deal out of the fact that this is a pure existential threat. This is way worse than global warming. Global warming is, but because the reason why no one pays any attention to it, as Chuck was saying, is because it's hard to evoke a visceral response to something you can't see. It's hard to evoke a visceral response to something you can't wrap your brain around. So most people are like, cybersecurity, whatever, you know, or, you know, you see what happens with TikTok, right? All your kids are like, hey, I don't give a shit. They have stuff anyway. So I'm good with this. I'm solid, you know, or on Google side, right? Where we all say, well, you know, hey, whatever they do, and I'm happy to turn over all of my PII to Google. So in exchange for an easier shopping experience, a more effective and more productive one.
Right.
Yeah. So you know, that existential threat that both to our critical infrastructure and to organizations and companies and so forth and so on is way bigger than global warming is. But again, in the global warming case, it's easy to market that to the American people because we see the hurricanes, we see California, Oregon, and Washington on fire, we see the oceans rising, we see the icebergs melting, et cetera, and the impact to the animal world is very evident as well. So, you know, that's why, and I'm a total free market guy, and you know, this is blasphemy coming out of my mouth, but that's why I want the government to get way more involved in marketing cybersecurity to the American people, and in providing, as Chuck says, I want that technology that they've been refining over the years as well, and to be made publicly available.
Okay, I got it. And then probably for you first, Steve, for this question from Dan Didier, he's basically saying the Wall Street Journal came out with an article on picking technologies and the effectiveness of making a long-term buy decision. And his question is he's wondering what thoughts are around to make sure you're picking a relevant cyber technology. What's the best way? What's the best? It's kind of a bang for your buck, but it's also the best decision. Is there some best way to think about picking the best relevant technology today?
I don't know what the best way is, but I'll tell you what.
Seems like we're plugging holes, you know, and we have software of the day, you know, things like that.
The way it's done is it's done through word of mouth, and it's done from the community, right? So if I wanted to pick the best, you know, isolation technology, I'd probably call Chuck and say, hey, help me out here, man. What works? You know, what's worked for you? How can you ratify that decision for me and help make me feel better about, you know, vendor A versus vendor B? That's what we all do.
Yeah,
so
word of mouth. That's why that content marketing is good. Chuck, do you have thoughts there or a summary of what we talked about?
It's going to throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing, right? The biggest issue with, you know, the software of the day, right, is it, and even if it comes to you with word of mouth, and it's great, it's solving your problem right now, the speed at which everything is changing, every day there's a new threat. You know, whether, you know, it's new attacks on the CPU, you know, we all heard about Spectre and Meltdown, or, you know, the management system built into the CPU, or wherever you're seeing it coming from, it changes every day. Every day there's a new CVE announcement, and every day there's a new vulnerability you have to be concerned about. And sometimes it's just moving the needle a little bit. Oh yeah, I got another problem with my web browser. I got to do a Microsoft update. It's all good and well. And sometimes it's game changers, like Spectrum and Meltdown. When they released, those were game changers. That took things in a whole new direction nobody had seen yet in the commercial side. I can't say whether or not the government knew about that one officially. So,
well, I'll reflect on this and then we'll finish up. But it seems like the old SIM and databases and threat libraries are just simply old because they're latent as it relates to what's happening. It seems the new stuff is attacking more of the infrastructure of that, and that's where the malware tends to hide within the infrastructure. So it's kind of a false sense of security to build a firewall in that, and even endpoint protection, I think, is getting older. So the question is, what will be the next generation? Back to Dan's question there. So,
Well, I will throw one thing into this. So what we're seeing is the threat space is dropping lower and lower in the stack, right? Used to be, viruses and malware to infect your computer. And then it moved down into rootkits into the operating system. And now it's moving down into hardware threats and infrastructure threats, just as you described. But I will say, though, tried and true still works. The number one way that people are getting in the network still is, and it's going to be for a good long time until we fix the wetware issue, is phishing. I'm speaking strictly from, our organization. The phishing techniques have really, the sophistication of the spear phishing has just really gotten good. I mean, we've had a couple of really super good attempts in the last year that I was pretty impressed with, considering all the kind of broken English and bad wording we've seen in the past. I mean, it's really well done, and somebody really took their time to try to get a sense of what it is that who my people were specifically. And then of course they use the C-suite, so they always try to masquerade as me to try to get in and work something. And
it's
wow,
so
I've seen some
dumb,
really
yeah.
good attempts
Yeah.
recently.
Well, phishing and passwords, it's sort of like wear your mask. If you do those basic things, you can do it. Well, okay, we're coming to the end of the hour. Great discussion. I have some good notes. We will publish that back with some of the links that people sent. And thanks everybody for joining. And Paul would like to finish up and talk a little bit about FCA and upcoming events. But before we do, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Steve, two industry experts. And what you're saying is really taken to heart.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate you having me.
Okay, thank you. Stay on, everybody. And then Paul is going to tell you a little bit what's coming for FCA. This is part of our cyber series.
No, thank you very much. This is an excellent conversation. Two quick events that are going to be coming up. The Young FCNs are hosting an informal social tomorrow night at the Kaleidoscope in Brookhaven. Starts at 6:30. If you guys would like to join and help give input to the Young FCNs, that would be great. And we have a November social coming up at Maggiano's on November 12th. Details in that are still being ironed out, so stay tuned for information, but it is going to be required to have reservations because it's going to be socially distant. If you're interested in it, please let me know. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. And then thanks, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Well, have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.